Welcome to Scary Story Podcast. In the first story, a restoration project goes wrong. The results are haunting. The second story might have you wondering what your friends are truly capable of. My name is Edwin, and here's a scary story. Old playground. Since we were stuck at home for most of our time off from school, my brother and I looked around for things to work on. My mom appreciated it, but we soon moved from fixing doors and patching spots on the roof, from being generally helpful, to building things we thought would be cool just for fun. We tried to make a small pond in the backyard, but it didn't work. We made a ramp out of wooden scraps, thinking that we would use it to play around with our bikes. We never used it. I could feel the relief in Mom's voice when we agreed to go to my aunt's house by the outskirts of town for part of the summer. The last time we visited her, I must have been around 8 years old. Back then, many of our cousins would get dropped off at her house and it would be like a month-long camping trip. We had bonfires, we camped outside, we ate what we wanted, and my aunt was more than happy to have us around. She lived by herself ever since she moved there, I guess to escape the city life. Nobody talked about it, but I think she had a lot of money from the bakery business that she sold. Either that, or she must have gotten a big check after her divorce, because she traveled for a while before settling into a big farmhouse, and she remodeled it. She had fields to grow things on, but she rented it out to a local farmer who used it to grow corn and grains. Obviously, as a businesswoman, she turned that into an event venue where every once in a while we'd get invited to have these huge meals. At least that's what I remember from when I was younger. My brother complained about the food, though. He kept calling them leftovers, which they were. People hosted weddings, parties, and all sorts of food, flowers, and balloons would be left over the next day. Well, that was before the incident. The family had rented out the entire place, and, upon the request, they wanted no services from my aunt. Now, she was used to this type of event also, usually from a VIP or a large family wanting to spend time away from everything and spend it by the fields on their own. But they always let her stay in her own guest house. But not this time. My aunt was staying with us when she got a phone call from the police department. And even though I was far too young to remember everything, I can recall her being extremely upset. When my dad drove her to her place, she was met by detectives, police officers, and people from the coroner's office. My mom came to pick us up when we tried to look past the caution tape around the fields, the white sheets like tiny hills around the playground area and by the edge of the cornfield. Neighbors had gathered, standing on the edge of the property trying to get a peek inside. That was the end of her business as we knew it, but she kept the place. We stopped visiting, though I think we went once to fix up part of the floorboards on the porch. Weeds had grown into it, and some rodents had made part of it their home. That was the last we had seen of the place, so we were excited to see what the place looked like now and how my aunt was doing. We even brought along our own toolboxes and our sawing kits in case we needed to repair stuff. Part of me believes that Mom sent us there for that reason. The place looked a lot better than when I remembered. Aunt Jane had gotten the walls repaired and painted. The field was not overgrown except for a few parts out in the corner of the property where the shed and the old trampoline and playground were. The old golden cornfields were now lined with green vines, likely tomatoes or grapes. But there was no way for me to tell for sure from a distance. The first days were fine. Aunt Jane was still baking all the time and cooked for us every morning. But soon, my brother and I started looking around for things to work on. There was an old tree house by the edge of the old cornfield behind the shed, and the latter had completely rotted out. We had made a sort of a treasure chest back when we were kids with all of our cousins, and part of us was still hoping that we'd find our old drawings or Hot Wheel cars up there. It didn't take long for us to hammer on some more wooden planks along the trunk of the tree, and we were able to climb up there. The old treasure chest was just an old rotting red toolbox. We found sticks, rocks, bottle caps, and a few marbles. The coolest part were the drawings. They were mine. Drawings of my cousins playing on the swings, another drawing of us up on the treehouse, a few scoring tables that we used to tally up points for our games. I looked around the playground to see that old swing set over by the shed and figured it would be nice to restore the entire play area, even though no children would be around to use it for some time. I mean, one of my cousins had a child recently, so it would be years until any younger children would come and play. But the thought of bringing back something like that for Aunt Jane was a great feeling. And without even discussing it, my brother and I went to work. When Aunt Jane came out later on that day as we were moving around part of the trampoline, she seemed nervous, asking us why we don't simply help out moving things around the attic or to help out with the old barn. But we were so excited about the playground that we simply told her that we'd come back to it. She insisted, and both of us could tell that she had trouble thinking about that area. Likely the incident. Maybe that's why this area was the only place that was unkept. So we backed off from the project for a few days and fixed up some other things, until we decided once again to go back to the playground. We patched up the fabric of the old trampoline and cleaned off the rust and added some of the missing padding. We cleaned up the weeds from under it and mowed the remaining part of the property on the first day. We should have listened to Aunt Jane and left that area alone. That night, I had some of the strangest dreams I've had in a while, with laughter and cries from children, to the rhythm of a squeaking sound off into the distance. I opened my eyes and I could swear that by the edge of the door frame was the figure of a child in a dress looking directly at me. I turned around and placed a blanket over my head, until finally I woke up to the knocks on my door the next morning. My brother had been outside early and had found the old trampoline torn to pieces. We went straight for the kitchen to find Aunt Jane, and when we told her about what we found, she seemed even more nervous, blaming it on perhaps an animal, but still strongly suggested that we stop working on that and simply go back to something else. My brother and I looked at each other, confused. We didn't have that much work left. Aunt Jane left to the kitchen, almost whispering to us that breakfast would be ready in 10 minutes, and to get ready. It was my brother's idea to at least fix the swing set. We needed a new chain and paint, and I agreed. After breakfast, we went straight back out to the playground, ignoring the fact that the fabric of the trampoline had been completely torn apart, right where we had patched it. There were vertical slashes along the seams we had made. My brother thought it would have taken some sort of big dog or a wolf to make such scratches, but I had a suspicion that maybe Aunt Jane had simply taken a knife or a set of scissors, and that night had gone out to work. We lifted the steel swing set and cleaned up the area underneath it. We tilted it on its side and started sanding off the old blue paint and rust as best we could. We cut up a new chain and linked it back to the original welds and replaced the seats after we had finished painting it all over again. It looked awesome. I even tested it out and it didn't even squeak. That feeling, though, wouldn't last very long. Aunt Jane sighed when she looked out into the playground and faked a smile, saying that the place looked great and thanked us. But she quietly stepped back into the house, leaving us at the porch in complete silence. Suddenly, we heard a scream. I ran inside first, my brother close behind me. We ran past the kitchen and down the hall, only to hear something back by the entrance of the living room that fell and broke. Aunt Jane had called us from the dining table asking if we were all right. We had the same questions for her. Soon, after even stranger things started happening in the house, with laughter and cries, the sound of things moving around during the day. But one night, both my aunt and I witnessed one of the creepiest things that still haunts me to this day. It was almost 11 at night, and we were watching the television in the living room when I heard a sound from the porch. Someone walking around and lightly tapping on the floorboards. Nobody else seemed to hear it, yet I still asked my brother to come with me to check it out. He grabbed his flashlight and we walked out into the porch. I followed that beam of light out from the green fields and down the dirt path toward the shed. The light beamed past the old treehouse and by the swing set. Then we stopped. On the swing on the right, the young figure of a girl with her head down, dangling her legs so the tips of her shoes dragged around the tiny rocks on the dirt. We heard Aunt Jane's footsteps behind us, uttering a breathless, "Oh no," when she followed the beam. My brother yelled out a hello at such a strange sighting out on private property at night. What would a young girl be doing there anyway, by herself? My brother was cautious. Perhaps the girl wasn't alone, so he ran inside to get an old wooden bat that Aunt Jane kept by the door. But while we waited for those 3 or 5 seconds, Aunt Jane and I realized that the girl wasn't looking away from us. Her dark hair was dangling in front of her face and onto the white lap of her dress. She was swinging in silence. The squeaking was gone from the new chain. Then she stopped. Her hands spread out wide as she let go of the chain and stepped onto the dirt. She took a step toward us. Aunt Jane told me to run inside the house as the girl rushed to us at an unnatural speed. We pushed my brother back into the house and I locked the door. My aunt couldn't explain what happened, but then told us about the last time that she hired workers to clean out the playground area. She was attempting to reopen her business and needed things in order once again. The workers couldn't finish. They kept complaining of strange things happening with machines malfunctioning, nails popping back out, paint buckets being knocked down, and finally, sightings of a little girl and a boy who liked to run around by the edge of the fields, wanting to keep their playground unchanged. We kept a safe distance from the playground ever since, and Aunt Jane somehow managed to make her venue rental business work with the occasional complaint of ghost sightings showing up on review websites. It seems to be doing well for her. The second story in this episode is called An Old Friend. It begins right after this. This story makes us face a harsh reality that sometimes we don't fully know some of the closest people to us. An old friend. My roommate showed me the photos of the new place and of what would be my room. I really hoped it wouldn't be facing some noisy street, but I wasn't there with them when they did the house hunting, so I was okay with getting the last pick. They had done the tough part already. I went through my things once again, and I did this about once a year moving to a new place. I was mostly used to it. What I couldn't get used to was throwing out all of the memories that I had gathered up until that point. Most of my high school stuff and birthday cards I had collected throughout my life were at my parents' home. But memories never stopped coming, so I kept gathering gifts. I think eventually we start running out of space to keep everything, but there are certain things that we're likely to keep forever. Pictures and frames is one of them for me. But I had found an exception. A framed photograph that I didn't mind putting in the trash can along with a greasy pizza box from the night before, and straight to the alley behind my current apartment building. It was from the night when we walked along the beach. Most of our other friends had left, and I was going to be driving Jessica home anyway, so we got to stay out a little later. I think that's sort of when we became real friends, I guess you could say. She told me a little about her problems and her parents and her other friends, how they all suddenly decided to ignore her. We had met in our English classes as part of a group presentation, and then I found out that she happened to know a lot of my other friends through other projects. We had lunch a few times, and we did our homework together, and soon everybody started considering her my best friend since we were always together. And she believed that. Once we left college, I started a job that I really wanted and was lucky to get right after graduating. It was challenging, different, and it made me think a lot about my past and where I was going. I was very involved in the process and eventually started going to conferences and doing overtime, reading books on the topic, and it basically took over my life. Jessica didn't seem to understand this, and her clinginess went on overdrive. But I looked at Jessica as one very happy person most of the time, just like at the beach, when she set a camera out by the cement wall where the sand and the street met, and she ran up to me and threw on the biggest smile. I end up looking awkward in most of my photos, but not on this one. I smiled too. I also smiled when I got the photo for my 22nd birthday. Jessica had left a gift bag at my doorstep after calling about a dozen times, asking where I was or what I was planning on doing that day. I had traveled an hour south to be with my family, and if I had mentioned that, she would have invited herself. I made an excuse about my phone, and eventually Jessica forgot about it. Before you start thinking horrible things about me, I need you to understand a few things about Jessica. I didn't consider her to be a good person. She picked fights between our friends, and she lied about me, and even when we all had proof with screenshots of messages and everything, she'd lie and say that it wasn't her. Then later, she'd apologize by doing something extreme, like somehow getting an expensive gift for you or writing long, elaborate apologies over text. I think a lot of people felt bad for her. I mean, I genuinely did. But I knew it was best to keep my distance once I saw what she was really like. Some of her stories are pretty intense too, and even though I didn't want to believe them at the time, I started to after about a year of our so-called friendship. She claimed to have been involved in the death of her sister, and about how she hated her father. She claimed to have looked things up online about how to, quote, get rid of him. But that she chickened out at the last minute even after gathering the money and everything. She said the places where this took place were sketchy and that she didn't want to go alone, then waiting for me to say something. When I first heard it, I laughed and she seemed offended by it. But instead of laughing with me, she started telling me of ways that she could actually do it, and if she wanted to, she could prove it to me. My smile was wiped away right at that instant. The way she looked at me, almost threatening me to never get on her bad side, made me feel genuinely afraid of being around her. That's when everything started. She knew I was looking around for a new place, and she had said many times before that when I started looking for an apartment, to ask her to come with me, that she was looking to move out too and that she wanted to be roommates. I should have told her no right then and there, but instead I simply ignored the suggestions or played it off as something that might happen in the future, that I would let her know. When she found out that I had already found a place with two of my best friends, she was beyond angry. She sent me messages and voicemails, and I used to dread having to read or listen to them. It was taking a toll on me hearing how bad of a friend she thought I was and how angry I made her. One of her last messages to me before I blocked her was that I would pay for what I did, that people get what they deserve, and that she'd be making the call. The call. See, most people would never understand what that means, but that's what she referred to, actually going for a visit with the people who would get rid of others. Part of the deal online was that she had to deliver money and cash to a specific place, to a specific person. this person would not say a word and accept it. She was only supposed to walk away to close a deal. My friends told me and warned me about her. They said that I should call the police, that the messages were threatening. But I don't know what got into me at the time. Thinking about making a report for empty threats like that would make me seem like a person who couldn't handle her own problems. Still, the thing Jessica described for me were serious. She mentioned that empty tunnel by the entrance to the beach walkway. It was part of a dark area that always smelled like algae and dead fish. A place that Jessica described as a perfect place to dispose of a body. We both laughed when she said that back when we were friends. Since then, I've gained way more respect for the dead, and I can't imagine laughing at something like that now. I can't tell you that I wasn't afraid for my life or that I didn't look both ways when I left my house for my graveyard shift. Getting messages from her was somehow better than the silence of her blocked phone number. But relief arrived that winter, when I was at work. See, I was numbed by a lot of things due to the nature of my job, and I felt like I had some type of superpower that made me unafraid of what was coming, and cautious about what was possible. Though most of the jobs I had to work on were natural and unfortunate. Every once in a while, I had a violent case. People who had been killed for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And others, like Jessica, who had the wrong intentions. When I identified the victim of a stabbing, I reported her as someone I knew, an old friend that I couldn't work on. A work partner at the morgue took over Jessica's case for me. To be one of the first to find out when new stories come out, be sure to subscribe for notifications via email over on scarystorypodcast.com and click follow on your podcast player. Scary Story Podcast is written and produced by me, Edwin Covarrubias. Ad-free versions, additional stories, and more are coming to the Scary Stories project, and I want you to be a part of it. Links to our Discord community, additional podcasts, and the website will be on the description of this episode that you can visit right from your phone or tablet. Any questions or comments can be sent directly to me, with the contact information being listed on the website. Thank you very much for listening.